Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first TI Innovator webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about building better on-chain infrastructure to enable institutional adoption, and I'm very excited to be joined by an all-star panel today, starting with Dr. Benjamin Beckmann, CTO of Midnight, Omar Azhar, VP and Head of Business Development at Matter Labs, and Louisa Head of Stablecoins, Strategic Partnerships and Investments at Mysten Lab. Very excited for that discussion. We'll be touching on on-chain infrastructure development as it relates to enabling more institutional adoption and what is needed, where it's going. Before we get started, as always, a little disclaimer, the information contained in this webinar is for informational purposes only and is not intended as investment advice. Without further ado, let's get into it and let's get started. So I'd love for each of you to introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about your organization. So let's start with you, Dr. Beckmann. Could you tell us a bit more about your background, the Midnight Network, and how does the Midnight Network differ with other smart contract platforms?
Sure. So thank you for having me. So I'm Dr. Ben Beckmann. I'm one of those guys that really does love computer science, and that's what all of my degrees are in. After finishing school, I moved into doing Fortune 20 corporate R&D, so working for really large companies and organizations, building applications in the private sector. The part that I learned there was it's much more delighting work if you're able to go kind of find the activities that you get to work on. And so I did that, and that's actually what brought me in to blockchain, is certain applications that I did for these Fortune 20 companies that demonstrated the capability of the system and how, well, crypto may be a killer app, but there are others. But as I was working through that, I found that there were missing pieces, right? So if you look at Web3, Web3 adds a lot of efficiencies, but it also makes things transparent. And so that's where the Midnight Network kind of starts to step in, is starting to give you back some of the capability that you may have lost as you've taken advantage of those efficiencies with Web3, but you want to preserve because they have certain freedoms to them. They allow you to associate, have commerce, and express yourself in certain ways that maybe you don't want to have just kind of publicly out there on the internet. So let me tell you what Midnight is. Midnight is a new layer one. It's a programmable blockchain with a smart contract language that allows you to introduce private information into a transaction where that private information never leaves your possession, and is simply evidenced by a ZK proof that's placed out on the chain. So the chain itself has very little knowledge about what's actually going on. It's a very easy to tell story. People kind of get this where, you can hold back some information, you can present it, but it's not necessarily made available out in the world. And it's built on academic rigor. So we're a spin out of IOHK, which is the company that built Cardano. And if you're have any kind of background there, you're going to realize that there's a lot of academic research that's been developed, and that technology is embodied in Midnight. So if you look at some academic papers called Kachina, that is embodied in Compact, our smart program language, which we'll talk about more later. ZSwap, which is an academic term for our intent system, is what's embodied in our system. So what we enable is we enable smart contracts that can allow you to preserve privacy. So like this morning, if you went to a convenience store and bought some coffee, not anybody on the internet can look that up, which you could in most Web3 applications. We want to go back to where you have the ability to control that. If you want to have a point-to-point interaction, the chain can still support it. And we want to give you the tools so that if you have certain compliance requirements, that you can lean into those. And we're just going to give you the efficiency that blockchain offers while adding some privacy back into the mix.
Thank you. Thanks, Ben. And next we have Omar. So could you please introduce yourself and share a bit more about your work at Meta Labs?
Sure. Thanks,
And
Sacha.
we would also love a brief overview of the ZK Sync network and its key differentiators as well.
Yeah, sure. So I have the business developments at Matter Labs, which is mostly in support of ZK Sync, the overall network. Previously, I was in the management consulting space here in New York, mostly working in the financial services industry, across over many different banks, mostly working in the data science and risk management area. Um, at ZK Sync, what we essentially do is we provide the infrastructure. We're essentially a chain cluster of layer twos built on top of Ethereum. And we pretty much provide the infrastructure for anyone to come and build their own customized layer two, whether you're a crypto native or a consumer focused go-to-market angle. So you might build a public blockchain, public layer two, or you're an institution and you need a private execution environment on top of Ethereum. Each of these chains, the reason we call it a network cluster is because we also will have interop. And so each of these chains, no matter how many of them are, can seamlessly interact with each other, right? So our view is that the world of blockchain is going to be requiring thousands and thousands of different layer two or chains actually, because blockchains pretty much can become almost like, think of like servers we do right now. So we kind of offer that horizontal scalability where anyone can come, they can build on top of Ethereum, but they're inside their own trusted and private layer two environment, and then can also have interoperability with either, they can build their own network of chains. Each can be bifurcated by region, by product, etc. Or they can have different multi-party use cases where, for example, you have cross-border or many different central banks and banks interacting with each other. Each of them can run their own private layer two network, but have trustless interop between them. And so that's kind of what we're building at ZK Sync. And that's kind of where most of our focus is on offering the ability for anyone to boot up and run their own private L2 networks.
Thanks, Omar. And last but not least, we have Louisa. So could you please share a bit more about your role at Mysten Labs, highlight a few notable projects that your team has been working on, and in particular, we'd love to hear, of course, about Sui Network and what makes it unique.
Sure. Thank you, Sacha, and thanks for having me. My name is Louisa Bai. I'm currently the head of stablecoins at Mysten Labs. I started off my career in traditional finance. I spent a good chunk of my life in capital markets. Did a stint in management consulting as well, just like you, Omar, and found my way into blockchain and crypto around 2017. So prior to Mysten Labs, I was at the Stellar Development Foundation working on partnerships over there as well. But since joining Mysten Labs, I've been working with stablecoin issuers in getting native US dollar stablecoins integrated to the Sui network. Some notable ones that you might have heard of, Circle's USDC, Ondo Finance's USDY, Agora, and First Digital. So it's been a real pleasure in working with the broader Sui ecosystem because I do think that Sui is quite unique and different to what we've seen in the market today. Mysten Labs is obviously known for being the original contributor to Sui. Our CTO, Sam, is the creator of the Move programming language that some other chains also have leveraged. We also built other products as well, just to call out. We've developed the Sui wallet, which is one of, if not the most popular used wallet in the Sui ecosystem. We also recently announced a decentralized storage network called Walrus that will be launching this year, that I think a lot of folks are excited about. And you asked me about the differentiating, what makes Sui unique compared to some of the other chains that are in the market today. I would say a lot of things, but just to narrow in on a couple of things I want to highlight for the context of this conversation. Aside from it being cheaper and faster, as most chains will also identify as, Sui operates under a object-based model, so compared to an account-based model that other chains operate under. What that means is objects like NFTs, like smart contracts, like assets like stablecoins are owned, modified by the users themselves, as opposed to the accounts that they're associated with, which ultimately we believe to drive more efficiency with how a chain can be utilized. We have very strong security and asset control. So in the context of issuing assets, stablecoins, real world assets, we believe that a lot of the features that institutions are looking for, it's available directly at the protocol level. And then the last thing I'll mention, we are a parallel execution chain. I read a really good research report that came out, that the Van Eck Asset Management firm came out with recently, giving a very good restaurant metaphor about parallel execution. So I would encourage folks to have a read of that, and if they are not familiar with what that is.
Awesome. Thanks, and thanks everyone for the very comprehensive overview. And so let's dive in. So let's first look at the current state of institutional smart contract adoption. And there's something very exciting. Dr. Beckmann, right? It's been about 3 months since Midnight's testnet launch. So we'd love to hear from you. How have the potential institutional clients reacted to the capabilities that you're offering on the network so far? And what features do you think are going to be key or most appealing once mainnet goes live?
Yep. So we're the nice part about where we're at is we're still early in our growth. So we are in testnet. Last year we did a DevNet, pounded out 1 million blocks. Now we're in testnet, and I think we're like 1.3 or whatever. So we're working our way up, running as fast as we can. And so the nice part about that is people can come and use it. So it's a very easy story to tell to get people interested, and then you can come and feel it. And the questions that we have are related to prior experiences that individuals or organizations have had with ZK technology. So our use of ZK is to enable privacy. It's not to enable scaling. So we're using it differently than you may have seen many others use it. And so we've adapted that into our smart contract language. So this is where people become interested, because the smart contract language is what allows you to get your job done. So if you've written basically a smart contract in something like Solidity, coming over to Compact is easy. It really will take you 5 seconds to kind of get the idea. There's public state that you can modify. There's witness information. This is the private information that can flow into the contracts. And then there's circuits, which are the functions that modify the contracts based off of the witness data in the public state. So when you describe that to people and you show them how the information stays on their side of the internet, but they can use the chain to help coordinate so they can get all the efficiencies out of the chain, that's pretty revolutionary. And they start to think of, what applications can I now bring back on chain, because I was missing that feature before. So that capability in the smart contract languages draws a lot of attention. And then as we've launched, so we're still sitting in testnet, but I can proudly say that we launched and we white gloved a few stake pool providers in October. That's when we launched. So I think we brought like 2 or 3 in. December, we went and looked back, and now we had 60. January, we looked back, and now we have 90. So for a permissionless chain that allows you to enable privacy, I'm already outnumbered in the number of operators of the node, because I only operate, I think, like 10. So that also kind of brings, kind of near and dear to my heart, that the system itself both be secure and operational, and they can provide this permissionless capability that institutions have just shied away from because they didn't have the ability to do things with the privacy capability that we provide.
Yeah, and I mean the privacy capability, I think, is really a cornerstone when you want to do anything institutional. So it's going to be a very interesting theme to follow, and how institutions really work around that with applications and networks like Midnight. So, Omar, from Matter Lab's perspective, have you seen institutions willing, able to engage with smart contracts, decentralized application, or on ZK Sync? And why is ZK appealing to those institutions as opposed to other L1s?
Yeah, so I think if we move back a little bit through time, so there's a lot of different types of institutions, right? So instead of going into like just broadly categorizing institutions, how they use it, I think the broader use, if you think of the broader problem statements, if you want to just at a very high level, there's the problem statement of blockchain solve for a lot of efficiency, right? Which everyone's very familiar with. This is like everyone's already been tackling this more or less. They fully understand it. If you go to the institutions that are, let's say, banks, they all fully understand the use case for blockchain and decentralized ledger systems, right? They fully understand, okay, this gets me much faster settlement. This is much easier traceability. And it's like they've been innovating on this front for quite some time, right? Like if you look at most of the major banks, they have very large blockchain digital assets teams who've already been testing out on EVM. They've been using different private blockchains such as Besu, R3 Corda, etc. So they fully understand the capabilities that blockchain solves for. They just haven't found really a solution to key problem statements that they keep running into is, how do I actually use this for multi-party use cases, right? Which means, how do I actually solve for interoperability? So they fully understand that, okay, I need my own private execution blockchain environment. They've already been building on EVM with smart contracts. The problem statement that they then have is, okay, if I'm bank A and I have my counterparty bank B, how do I do, let's say, cross-border or DVP or any of these other types of cross multi-party use cases? And so that's kind of where ZK Sync comes in for that particular problem statement, right? We use zero knowledge proofs for scaling as well as, but that also means it's being used for transaction validity. And the nice property of that is we can build zero knowledge, essentially, you can kind of consider them almost like bridges or interop as we call it. So you can have many different L2s that are fully private, permissioned, and fully compliant that each institution can run on its own with its own like walled garden, secured by Ethereum underneath, and they can then transact with their counterparty on their own private permissioned L2 without really having to exchange data, right? But each of them can rely on the fact that the zero knowledge cryptographic proof of what the other is doing is correct, right? So I can send essentially a 10 USDC or $10 values worth of stablecoin from bank A to bank B. It's essentially a burn and mint function. You never have to see what your counterparty's actual accounts look like, but you can verify that what they have done is computationally correct, so you can accept their transaction, right? And that's just two entities example. You can scale this out to as many L2s as you want, and then you essentially get this nice property of this network cluster where everyone's able to essentially run their own layer 2 on top of Ethereum, so they can rely on Ethereum as a very neutral global settlement layer, right? That can't necessarily be corrupted. It's easily the most securable system that's out there in the blockchain world as well. But you're operating within your own secure environment, right? Within your own compliance, your own private environment. And so that's kind of what ZK Sync is mostly offering for the institution. That's where most of the interest really is. It's, hey, you're bank A, we can offer you your own private permissioned L2, and you can bring in your other counterparties and actually test out a lot of these multi-party use cases that previously just were not necessarily possible, right? Without significant trust implementations with third-party bridges, etc., and data corruption. So that's one example. That's one side of the problem statement, which is mostly around multi-party uses, cross-border settlements, and all that. The other area that we're generally seeing is more on the asset management and fund management side of things, where they're looking at the crypto world as a whole new next generation of distribution and a way to access markets that they previously just couldn't access with the existing rails, right? This means potentially thinking through distribution. This is where we're seeing a lot of the tokenization efforts come in, right? Tokenized money market funds, tokenized private credit deals. And once you tokenize these things, then you're starting to get into decentralized finance. Okay, now I'm actually making these assets that previously were very hard to utilize in any other way. I couldn't really, hard to use it for collateral, etc. But once you tokenize them, that entire space opens up, right? So if I have a tokenized money market fund, I can then start to think of, okay, can I potentially use this in maybe Aave or some other money market, use it as collateral, mint a stable coin, and then actually use it for something else rather than just letting it sit there. And then obviously then there's a whole distribution aspect too, right? Now you can start thinking of distributing it to maybe high net worth individuals or funds and institutions in Latin America, in Southeast Asia, because blockchains are not really confined to different geographies really that much. So those are kind of two large problem statements that we're seeing, and they're very different types of institutions that are tackling them using our technology for that. One is, hey, we already understand fully like the blockchain use cases. It's massive efficiency gains for us through either settlement and just overall, multi institutional problem statements. So we can each put up our own layer 2, use interop. We never have to interact with the overall like broader crypto ecosystem. We don't really want to just yet, but it's a neutral settlement layer of Ethereum. And on the other side, you have all the funds, asset managers, etc., that are looking at entirely new markets that they can go into, and entirely new ways that they can think of leveraging their assets.
Super interesting. And yeah, I mean, the interoperability is really the core unlock, right? If you mean it, and when it goes to moving to a blockchain infrastructure. Thanks, Omar. And so, Louisa, what about Mysten Labs? Which, among the various products that you guys offer, which ones are currently drawing most interest from institutions, and what do you think is driving that interest?
Yeah, no, I'm going to build off of what Omar said. I like the way how he categorized it into those two buckets. So from an asset manager and just investor interest of the projects that Mysten Labs have built, we started to see asset managers that are also issuing ETPs, right? So either it being a trust or an electronically traded note out in Europe. We're starting to see issuers like Grayscale, 21 Shares, Van Eck create these products so that they can be distributed to a broader investor base. That on top of leveraging the SWI network to tokenize real world assets as well. But more on the first bucket of how institutions are leveraging or using the SWI network today, I would say the most popular use case is by far decentralized finance. So SWI DeFi currently has over, $500 million of daily traded volume. And I would suspect more than half of that is from institutions trading and interacting with DeFi protocols on SWI. And why do I think that they have decided to spend some, if not all of their time interacting with SWI DeFi? I think it's because we have really awesome builders in the SWI ecosystem. They've built really, really great user-friendly protocols compared to some of the other ecosystems, and institutions prefer trading there versus other venues. And why did these builders choose to build on SWI? I think that really touch upon some of the differentiator factors that I mentioned in my first comment around the ability to take advantage of the move object-based centric model and parallel execution, et cetera. So I'll keep it short for now because I think we're going to get into a little bit more about what types of use cases am I optimistic about and things that I would like to see more of. So,
yeah, totally, and well, since Ben, you mentioned a lot about, and Omar, also the big theme of privacy. Let's zoom in a bit on data privacy development, what it means. So let's start again with you, Dr. Beckmann. Could you elaborate a bit on Midnight's data protection mission and really explain how enhanced on-chain data privacy benefits institutional users?
Thank you for that. Yeah, so we have a mission to kind of give back some freedoms to users, and this is has a few cents kind of a few ways to take this. So if you look at more traditional applications, Web 2 applications, you're not in control of much of nothing, and it's used potentially offensively against you to get you to do things. That's a business model. I get it. It makes sense. But you're not in control. So we want to step towards Web3, where you're actually in control, you're custodial of things, right? You can use others in the ecosystem to help you get stuff done, but you're the responsible party, and there's efficiencies that can be had with that, both as an institutional organization and then just as an individual that can take advantage of this. But it's all transparent. You can see almost all of it. So you've lost those freedoms, right? And so we want to give them back. We want to give you the ability to have freedom of association, right? So if you have a social network that you're preserving on chain, I don't want to give away who all of my friends are, and maybe I'm mad at somebody on Friday and I blocked them, right? That doesn't need to be everybody else's business. Business relationships fall into a similar category, right? Like who's my lawyer? That doesn't need to be public record. It's only needed when an incident occurs and I have to give them a call. Freedom of commerce, right? Who you interact with, how you interact, what you buy, being able to be profiled off of that. All of that needs to be returned back to a way where you're in control, right? Occasionally, sometimes you have to grant permission because it's required. But many times, when I went and bought that coffee, it's really none of anybody's business how that occurred. And so this is both individual and in the business context of supply chain. Can't use Web3 to start doing your purchasing because it reveals your supply chain, and now your competitors can decide, can I compete on that product or not? Right? If you want a wonderful tool to be able to go spy on the competition, that'd be the way to do it. So you can't do it, so it stops you, and it's because you can't keep these interactions private, right? You don't have that ability. What doctors do I frequent? That could be embarrassing to me if people are able to see that. So I have no freedom there. So we want to be able to give them back that. And then expression, right? I might own NFTs that maybe are distasteful to somebody else, or I might own RWAs that show how I have a certain position in the market. And again, that's between me and maybe some parties I'm willing to share it with, but it's not an open record. It doesn't need to be. It can be. I can make that choice and enable it, but it doesn't have to be. And many Web3 tools force it, right? You get the efficiency, but you're also kind of out on the internet, ready for anybody to say what they think. So what Midnight lets you do is we're a blockchain that allows you to keep a secret. Briefly, how this works is when you make a transaction, you do that on your side of the internet. You do that on your laptop, on your desktop, in your IT infrastructure, right? Wherever the right embodiment there is. You prove that transaction locally. So literally on my laptop, it takes seconds. And then you submit that proof and any update to public state, if there is any, to the chain. Voila, off it goes. Turns out we can do these proof generations in about half of a block, so you don't even feel any extra latency like you may if you're waiting more on that particular tool. And the chain itself, you can interrogate it, but you're only going to see a whole bunch of proofs and then the public state that's shared anyway. So that is kind of where I see that we're coming in to enable. There are use cases around collateral, right? I don't want to present my entire collateral portfolio in a way that you could use against me. You can have dual party interactions where only those two parties actually know what the interaction was. It's not shared necessarily with a third or a hundredth. And it's through the proof submission. So by doing the proof submission in the way that we do it, we literally have a system that's more decentralized than other Web3 systems just by their nature, because even the transaction processing to advance the state, much of that is done off chain. So enabling you to be in more control and have the determination of what information you want to expose, that's where we're going.
Fascinating. And yeah, collateral privacy is also a huge topic, because if other people can know what your positions are, obviously and from a financial infrastructure perspective, it's not promoting accurate price discovery. It's just understanding what other people's position are, and then leveraging that to take advantage of it. So Omar, Matter Labs chose an open source policy for its work, which is quite interesting. How do you see this accelerating adoption of ZK-proof technology? Obviously, under the lines of institutional adoption, how do you see that concern with transparency and security?
Yeah, so I mean, one, I think building in the open with open source, so we're fully MIT licensed. Anyone can take a look at the code base. Anyone can utilize it however they see fit. And since we're in the Ethereum ecosystem, we have pretty much the same overall Web3 ethos, right? Which I think if you want to think of it in terms of just three key buckets, it's trustless, it's open and permissionless, so anyone can use it, and then secure. On the trustless piece, you want to be able to build a system which you don't have to rely on third parties for the security of your own assets, for the validity of your own transactions. You want to be able to have full control of everything and self-custody. This means not just at like an individual account level, but also for us, our users really are the different L2 operators. So you want it to be trustless in that I can operate a layer 2, and I don't have to rely on what anyone else is doing, right? I don't also have to rely on some sort of validator set, etc. That's part of the trustlessness aspect, right? Then there is the open permissionless. Anyone should be able to come in and participate in the network, be able to build either their own L2 or build another one of the existing open layer 2 that are fully public and permissionless, right? This is extremely important for adoption and overall scaling the ecosystem. And then the last part is security. How can you really be certain that a closed source code base is secure if you can't necessarily inspect it that much, right? Or go through it. We have very rigorous standards on security aspect. We spent well over like $10 million on audits, and we consistently do like multiple layers of audits, both from code hackathons as well as from tier 1 security firms as well. If the code base is not secure, you can't really put any money on it, right? And so all of that really does somewhat require a fully open source standard that we're building. At the end of the day, this is meant to be a open permissions protocol for the entire world to adopt. It's not necessarily like there's no SaaS licensing model, et cetera, behind this. And so I think that's pretty important, because if you're an institution and you are looking for, a place to build, and you have different privacy requirements, you have compliant requirements, and you have different security requirements, it's fairly critical that the previous iteration of the chains that these guys were using were all private licensed blockchains, and that has not really been working for them for the most part. It hasn't really gone off proof of concepts. It hasn't really gone off pilots. There isn't much being done in production, right? But if you actually have a protocol that is well secure, it's completely open source, you can dive into it, you can modify it as you see fit as well, right? So you can change different aspects of it. You can change the sequencer, you can change where the data goes. It could go into a third-party DA layer like a Celestia, Eigenlayer, a Veil, or you can like keep the data on Ethereum L1, or you can even post the data into your own private servers, right? So these types of configurations are also pretty important to be able to allow, which means you kind of have to go with open source. And we essentially don't specify like, hey, here's how you should build, or this is the only way to build.
Yep, and it's super interesting. I mean, obviously, I think that's one of the key developments that we've seen in the blockchain space, is having more and more of those building blocks open source and open for more scrutiny.
Yeah, I think one other thing is, like, if you look at what are the systems that have really taken on global adoption, Linux, for example, which pretty much runs a lot of the backends for most corporate institutional systems. You have, a lot of the quants are going to be using things like Python, C++. These are all open source libraries that are well adopted because you've had so many different eyes on it to build on top of it. There's a whole plethora of engineers across the world. You need to be able to take advantage of what they can build and add on to something. And that's really only capable if you're building an open source.
Yeah, I mean, security through obscurity has never been the best path to robust systems.
Exactly.
So it's very, very interesting. Louisa, turning to you next. And maybe feel free to bounce off of anything that Omar Ben said previously, but maybe with more of a focus on stablecoins. How do you see data privacy factoring into the future of stablecoin adoptions for those institutional clients? And in your experience, what types of partnerships or investments are most critical for advancing those?
No, I love this question. And I'm actually going to build off of what Ben said on this one. So you can think about privacy in so many different ways, but in the context of stablecoins, I'm going to use a very simple example, which is I am going to purchase a very overpriced almond milk latte in Williamsburg. And if I decide to choose to use a debit card that is issued by JP Chase will not be okay with having all of the transaction details of that coffee, the time of that coffee, and all of that be visible to anyone on chain, right? And I, as a customer of JP Morgan, would also not like that level of detail to be made available on chain. And I think this is actually a really, really important point, because when it comes to financial information or data, I feel like it's probably one of the most, if not the most, sensitive and personal information that an individual can own. And I think even over the course of, 50, 100 years, as people become more comfortable with sharing information in general, this is still one piece of information that I think will always need to be protected at some level. And so in order for a bank like JP Morgan to move any of their current payment transactions that involve their retail customers leveraging a stablecoin, this privacy piece needs to be solved for. And I think Omar gave a couple of really good examples of what they're working on over there, being able to hide balances, being able to hide the sender and the receiver of who's involved in a transaction. I think all of these are really good features that we're already seeing today. But what I would like to see more of is working together with the JP Morgans of the world in understanding what is truly needed by their customers and how that will work with their existing infrastructure, and how USDC or other stable coins can be incorporated into that in a safe manner that we are all comfortable with. I think that's the way I think about it. And not sure if anyone else has anything else to add on that topic. Cool.
Awesome. And so you've talked about collateral privacy. Obviously, there is a big link also with stable coins, because oftentimes stable coins are a good way to provide collateral. We've talked about security aspects, really building on very secure systems that are robust. And now let's dig in a bit on potential other institutional use cases. And so let's shuffle a little bit the order and start with you, Louisa. So what other, could you share some of the other future institutional use cases that you anticipate, and what type of infrastructure will be required to be able to facilitate them?
Yeah, I'm going to cheat a little bit here. I do think this year we will start to see, I think real world asset tokenization is very much going to be the theme of this year. It's definitely not a new use case or concept. You have, the Franklin Templetons of the world, the BlackRocks of the world that have already tokenized money market funds. You saw Apollo coming out with a tokenization of their credit fund. So I think we're going to start to see more and more of that from institutions, either it being in real estate and gold, anything that currently is tradable in a traditional market. I think we will start to see more of these types of instruments come on chain. But I think in order to do that, one, we need more regulatory clarity, which I think we are starting to see. And I think we also need better custodians. We need better treasury management tools. I think in order for the large institutions to take this seriously, and to be comfortable to move their existing customers' assets on chain or to be reflected on chain, we need to, one, fix also the privacy issue as well. So from an infrastructure standpoint, we do need better custody services, treasury management tools, and regulatory clarity.
Yeah, and I mean, in terms of regulatory clarity, I don't know if people watched yesterday the press conference. Yeah, hopefully there's a lot of hope. We'll see.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so again, privacy security comes back into the mix, and it's often a common obstacle to institutional onboarding. So Omar, can you talk a bit about the Validium model and how it could resolve those concerns? And have you seen solutions in practice at scale?
Yeah, sure. But before I do that, I just want to add on to the additional institutional use cases. So, Louisa, you brought up the tokenization of a lot of different real-world assets, right? I think the interesting next stage, so everyone understands some of the benefits of tokenizing assets, whether it's full private credit syndication, like putting that fully on chain. You get benefits, some efficiency benefits from instant 24/7 settlement, etc. But I think the interesting thing that's going to start happening, and this is something that we're trying to figure out and working with some of the teams, some of the large asset managers that are tokenizing funds on ZK Sync. Like, for example, we have Janice Henderson with Tradable, which has $1.7 billion of tokenized private credit deals. The interesting thing that you might start seeing is the evolution of stablecoins that, not really stablecoins, but like dollar coins with yield that essentially represent different types of trading strategies and risk portfolios, right? So for example, in Tradable's example, they've got 23 or so different private credit deals. These are each individual deals, right? They've been tokenized, so you already get some advantage of 24/7 settlement, much faster, movement of funds, etc. But I think the real next iteration of innovation that will probably happen is how do you package all these up into almost like a bond type structure that is just like a dollar coin that has yield, right? And if you take that even further, this essentially is a evolution of what Athena's already done. Athena's essentially has converted the basis trade into a dollar structure, right? Into a dollar representation with yield. Take that even further, and then you're going to start seeing, I think, an evolution where everyone is going to start figuring out, okay, how do I convert different trading strategies or different portfolio strategies into a dollar structure with yield? Because that dollar is now fully permissionless, or can become fully permissionless with the broader DeFi ecosystem. Because if you try and do each of these, like there's thousands and thousands of different assets, right? If you tokenize each one, it's going to be practically impossible to figure out how to integrate them overall into different DeFi places with compliance, permissions, all that. It's probably much easier to synthesize them into, let's say, a dozen, maybe 20 different types of coins, and each one has a different risk profile, right? And investors and sophisticated investors fully understand the risk profiles, but this allows you to then take those 20 or so different risk profiles and then actually make them compliant and be able to be used across different DeFi ecosystems and also different types of distribution strategies. So I think that's the next iteration of tokenization. And that's something that we're trying to work on, figure out. Obviously, there's different compliance aspects. There's also different types of, like, how do you actually create these structures? But that's a very interesting area for institutional use cases that we're pretty keen on trying to figure out and work with our institutional partners on. Now, when it comes to the Validium, so the Validium is really just a term for a layer 2 that does not post its data to Ethereum, right? It posts its data somewhere else. Either it posts it to like Celestia, Eigen, or Avail, like these third-party DA layers, or it posts it to a completely private server. If it does the private server posting of the data, then it's fully private chain. It's a fully private layer 2. And that's really the private permissioned layer 2s that I've been talking about. It's essentially, any institution or any entity pretty much, posting data on their own server, but they essentially, the rest of the world acknowledges what they're doing is completely correct and valid. They're not doing anything wrong because they're using zero knowledge proofs. A couple examples of this already. We already have one of these Validiums on mainnet. It's been live since, I think, late November. It's called Gravity. It's a regulated DEX. So they've been doing about $100 million in volume daily. You don't really know about it because it's fully private, right? But they're operating on mainnet since the last like 2 months. There's also another one that's coming out soon that's currently on like testnet. So Deutsche Bank, they're tokenizing fund management, and they're experimenting on how to pretty much move the entire fund management process from fully on chain, and they're doing it in a private and permissioned layer 2. It's called Memento blockchain, and I think they've been working with the Moderator of Singapore on like getting all the regulatory hurdles and the questions and answers being solved for. So already we're seeing quite a lot of activity there, and we have a lot of interest as well on different institutions that now want to take this even further and say, okay, instead of just one private L2 called the Validium, we want to run multiple of them, one for each entity. We want to be able to run 9 of them. We want to be able to run 100 of them, because we have use cases where I actually do need 100 different ledgers that are private from each other, but they're able to interact with each other in a trustless manner and able to trust just the zero knowledge proof that what each one is doing is fully correct, right? So that's kind of where we're at in this space. And I imagine by the end of the year, I would like to see probably maybe at least 10 of these, maybe even up to 50, start getting to either testnet and mainnet. All of them being able to be interoperable with each other, but each of them setting their own guardrails for how they want to work within the broader network.
Yep, and that's what sometimes we forget about, right? Because a lot of it is being able to interact with people from outside your organization, but even within your organization, sometimes you need some of those guardrails, and that's where it's really important. So, Dr. Beckmann, I'll let you, if you have anything to add to the points that were made by Louisa and Omar, feel free to start with that. And after that, would love to hear from you what any other institutional use cases that you feel are currently overlooked, and obviously how Midnight fits into addressing those needs.
Okay. Yeah, I will fill in some of the comments because I think I like where this is going. So things that are overlooked by institutions. Well, there is a subtle trend of moving things off chain, which is slightly disturbing, right? We have an efficiency machine. That's what a blockchain is. You may want to move it off chain for cost efficiency reasons, but if there are other reasons, then I'd like to ask why. And I bet you a lot of it is, well, I'm revealing too much, right? So certain applications, I agree with Louisa, RWA is going to be killer, but where does it get stuck? Like, how far can you go? Can you do the whole thing? Or is it just a portion gets the chain? And I would actually kind of challenge the audience who watches this I think we can get really close to the entire thing on chain where you can preserve your customers' privacy and enable them to do trades that they want, where they can represent their positions in ways that don't reveal things that they don't want to reveal. So I think, those, like, the overlooked is kind of the trend, the retrograde trend, but I also think compliance. If we're talking to institutions are there and they're generally bound by some compliance rules. It varies from industry to industry, kind of very broadly. Like sometimes the compliance is all up front, other times it's operational compliance. And so in giving them the tools where in the smart contracts that they want to interact with, the appropriate challenge and potential monitoring compliance capabilities are there so that if need be, they can demonstrate that they have sufficient systems to perform the functions that they're being asked to perform. It's not just banking, right? This could be in the electrical space, this could be in the pharmaceutical space. There's lots of spaces that this can work. And so those are generally overlooked simply because you don't think you can do it with the tools of the trade at the moment. And I've got my hand up in the air saying, we got a new one, come give it a try, because I think we'll open a few doors for you.
Yep, and that's pretty pretty much the gist. So looking ahead, how and let's do a quick round table. So how do you see the relationship between privacy-focused infrastructure, and institutional adoption evolving, and what will ZK proofs play in this evolution, according to you?
If you don't mind, maybe I'll go first because I think it's probably really obvious what my answer is going to be. I think it's going to be a requirement. I think there are certain rules that are in place and certain freedoms that people just want, right? Even if the rule doesn't make you do it, your customer probably will. And so I think as these organizations step in this direction, they're going to ask the privacy question, and they're going to have somebody in their organization saying, yeah, absolutely have to have it.
Yep. And then Omar or Louisa?
I'll go next. I'll keep it quick, Omar. I completely agree with Ben. I think maybe the only thing I would add on here is a call to action for anyone listening, any of the institutions out there listening. We would love your input on how you would like us to help us design an on-chain privacy feature that you think will work well with your existing systems, and something that you think your end users would like to have before they're comfortable in using a stablecoin in their everyday payments flow. That's my call to action and answer.
That's great. Yeah, in similar vein as well, we have started essentially, as this is going to be a year of rapid innovation, getting us to complete a lot of key milestones on ZK Sync. For example, getting interop fully up and ready on mainnet by next quarter, getting to significantly faster throughput, like in thousands per each chain, getting our new proof system, which essentially get transaction costs down to significantly small fractions of a penny. But the more important thing that we started doing as well, and this is for any of the listeners on here, is we've also started taking into account a lot of the institutional needs in terms of how you want to build these private chains, and also how do you want to build the interfaces for interop as well, right? So if there's multiple different institutions that are coming to us to get like, hey, these are the use cases that we imagine. How would you go about building this? We've started taking those types of technical and product intakes into account. And we started building our stack to be much more suited towards those types of use cases. So if you are looking at use cases where you want to build on top of Ethereum, you want it because you understand it's your global layer one, you want access to the broader Ethereum market, but you want it to be done in your own private permission manner with potentially interop, we are starting to build to those specific specifications on top of what is already available in the vanilla format.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and another fire round for you guys. So be ready. So what ongoing developments that you're having at each of your organizations do you expect to see institutions interacting with the most by, let's say, the end of the year, right? End of 2025. And if we want to go other way around, maybe Omar.
I can start that. I think so. We're already seeing a number of RFIs and RFPs come in on this aspect. So we think that the most adopted use of our technology will be, like as I've been saying, is mostly private and permissioned layer twos with interop. And so either institutions are going to use it for their own use case, where they're going to build their own ecosystem and onboard their clients, etc. They might have L1 assets like Ethereum or others, but they might have their own tokenized assets within them. That's one area. And then the other one is just like the very large gamut of multi-party use cases where, hey, here's five of us. Each one of us needs to run our own private, like permission blockchain, but interop is a significant problem for us. Help us solve that.
I think I can go next. From my side, obviously, I do think that SWI will be the most popular project that institutions will be using, at least for the near term. But in terms of what aspects of it, I do think decentralized finance will continue to grow as the ecosystem is bringing on additional their trading activities. So for example, we will be bringing on more Bitcoin liquidity. We implemented a native bridge that was launched for like native wrapped Bitcoin from Ethereum to SUI, and we're seeing a lot of demand there. And I think institutions will start to see more trading pairs available against stablecoins, against other volatile assets that may pique their interest. And I would also like to hope that institutions will start to see interest in this new protocol that we'll be launching called Walrus that I mentioned earlier. It's our decentralized storage network. I think it could work very well as they are starting to think about the utility of blockchain in general. And if they believe that SUI is a good option for transacting, Walrus will be a wonderful complementary storage option as well.
And to just kind of go from our perspective, so we're a little earlier in our maturity cycle than the other panelists here, but we're trying to adapt our systems so that they can be used by these organizations, right? So delivering open source code with we do an Apache 2 license, so you can take it, use it as you see fit. We're partnering with lots of organizations, which I would be proud to say are heavy hitters, and you're going to start hearing more about them. These are organizations that you've seen in other ecosystems that want to come and participate in Midnight. We have some technological, let's say, advantages that we've borrowed from other ecosystems. So we're built on top of Substrate, which comes out of Polkadot. So there's lots of experience there. We're built on Halo 2, which is where all of our cryptography lands, and all of the audits and the code will be open source, so people will be able to come and contribute. And this is just kind of what's coming in the near term. Along with tools for the developers, right? Because the developers have to be catered to so that the tools land in the environments that they're used to working with. The smart contract language that we have is TypeScript based, so there's no jarring interaction when you go from doing the Webby code to doing the contract code. It's the same. You use the functions the same way, they act the same way. Isn't that nice? And then we've started to build out additional tools that literally one of them is called the Witness Protection Program, because the witness data is the private data. That's what you want to keep private, and you want to know if you're disclosing it in some computation somehow. So without flipping a bit, we enable the Witness Protection Program, and we'll statically analyze your code and tell you where that's at. And if you're disclosing something you shouldn't, we'll give you a little no-no to help you kind of learn how to build these types of tools so you can take advantage of them. So where we think the institutionals will come for us this year is in that learning curve to see what the tools are available for them and actually touch and feel and see how they can operationalize it.
Fascinating. Fascinating. And in terms of, just to close the conversation in terms of catalysts, right? And maybe anything you want our listeners to really have, keep in mind for the upcoming year. What do you think are going to be the biggest catalysts for on-chain institutional adoption in this year?
For me,
start? Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, it's really regulatory clarity, and I think we're starting to see that. But double clicking into that, selfishly, I'm really looking forward to the stablecoin bill that will be coming out very soon, hopefully, and that I think will be the main catalyst for a lot of things to get moving in our industry. But in particular, institutional adoption, institutional movement, their interest, their level of investment, and commitment on building on-chain, I think will be that.
Yeah, I definitely agree on that. I think the regulatory clarity, I think all eyes on the stablecoin bill, how that's going to go. And I think that's going to open up a lot of the doors, even for like internal large corporate ledger management systems. Like if you think about that, like large global Fortune 500 companies, they are just blockchains within themselves. They've got blockchain problems internally so much, and I think this year might be, the year people actually start tackling a lot of those problems once they have regulatory clarity.
I think this year is going to be a big year. I think I live in the US, so there's definitely change afoot. It seems to be blowing in the direction that's beneficial to our industry. I look very much for kind of enjoying that and getting the attention that will come with it. So we got to be ready right? We gotta have tools that work. We can't sell BS stories. It's got to be legit. But bring it on. We're ready to fight the fight finally. So I think it's going to be a great year.
Thank you. And if do we have any final thought, final comment? Or are we good to close it up? All good. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks to everybody for joining this webinar. Thanks to our amazing set of panelists for providing your insights. And this concludes our first The TIE Innovator webinar. Thanks to everyone for joining, and see you next time.
Thank you.